that they identified this as a Tesla device. And as far as we know, there was no ability to identify it. They were totally clueless. No evidence to the contrary. Here we see, these are some pictures of some mysterious plasma globes that were seen over Norway of various sizes, from as small as, say, one of those hot air balloons all the way up to, several hundred feet in size. And this brings another interesting thing into the UFO picture, because a lot of UFOs could be explained by these Tesla plasma balls. See, one of the most puzzling things about UFOs is the fact that they display what is called non-ballistic motion. That means they're going along like this at a very high level of speed, maybe Mach 2 or Mach 3, and all of a sudden, boom, they go like that. And they make a very, very hard turn. Now, if you were a jet pilot in the U.S. Air Force and you were going at Mach 2 or Mach 3 and you were to make a turn like that, you'd end up as chunky salsa, because of the G-forces. And so everybody was saying, well, this must be some superior alien technology. But see, if all it was plasma globes, then, these things have virtually no mass. I mean, their mass is very negligible, so therefore there's no problem with inertia. You can just zoom all over the place with them, and it looks very impressive from the ground. So you never know. A lot of UFOs might be now explained by these things. Now, this is another example of how you can use Tesla shields to defend your city, if you have the technology, of course. Many of you have probably seen those Russian dolls. Well, they nest one doll inside of another doll inside of another doll. There's a word for it, but I forget what it is. Well, that's what they do here. They nest 3 Tesla globes, one inside of the other. And what happens here is that the energy comes along, like let's say there's an air burst over the city of Moscow. And what they do is they deploy these triple globes over the city. And there's gamma rays coming in from the burst. And that's, of course, the most lethal form of radiation from nuclear explosion, or gamma rays. Because if you get hit with gamma rays, depending on the range of how far away you were from the blast, they can either kill you in a few hours, a few days, or a few weeks with massive cancers and so on. Well, if this 3-level thing is deployed, the gamma rays hit the outer ring, which is the red ring, and at that point the power is pulled back, the frequency of the radiation is pulled back, and they become X-rays. Still pretty dangerous. They hit the second ring, and they're dialed down a little bit more. They hit the inner ring, the kind of yellow ring there, and at that point they end up being powered down to the point that they're just simply radio waves. And of course radio waves are relatively harmless because they're all around us here, and of course obviously we even listen to the radio. So this would in effect render even the power of an air burst absolutely harmless against an entire city. Now here again we're talking about Tesla globes and Tesla domes. This again, these were provided to me by a friend who's an Air Force radar tech, and he says this particular one is an example of a Tesla dome because again it's hollow inside. Here's another one that's even more spectacular. This one is over the Brookhaven National Labs in Long Island, and that one actually gives me a little bit of hope because maybe that's one we're making. I mean, if it's exactly centered over a laboratory that we own, but of course, who knows, maybe it's just the Russians messing with our heads again. And then finally, this is an interesting one. This is actually an example of radar jamming. Notice how this one is solid, and where is it? It's over Area 51. Naturally, they're going to be jamming that airspace, and that's being done by our own government, of course. Now, I've mentioned several times these woodpecker beams and the woodpecker grid. If you look at the graphic there, you'll see that's what's going on. You'll see that there's over-the-horizon beams of energy coming across the Arctic Circle from the Soviet Union and crisscrossing over America. And these are done several times so that you have this enormous grid of energy right over North America. And this was, as I said earlier, this was deployed in July of 1976, and it's been online ever since. And people ask, well, what does that do exactly? Well, it does many things. That's the problem. Mainly, it's an over-the-horizon radar, but it can also use this grid, as I've already mentioned, to deploy scalar globes to either change our weather, to cause people to go crazy. You can use it to deploy weapons, as they did with the Challenger disaster, and you can also use it to cause mental or physical illness. We'll talk more about that a little later, but you can see there how those beams might intersect all over the nation in that fashion. Now, the question has been raised many times, if the Russians have had the power like this in so many ways to take us out for around 30 years, but they haven't, why is that? Well, fair question. There's a reason for this. The number one reason is that, of course, the times and the seasons are in the hand of Yahweh God. We don't know what his timetable is, and of course, obviously, neither do the Russians. So if this is going to happen, it's going to happen when he wants to, and not 1 second before. But additionally, the Russians aren't the only nation with these weapons. There are 4 or 5 other nations that have these weapons, and some of them are our friends. And so over the years, we have actually had several occasions when the Russians were, in fact, deploying these weapons against us, and they were stopped by allies. The most obvious example here is in 1986, April. The Russians were sending energy towards both the LA and San Francisco corridor to try and create a massive earthquake that would cause catastrophic damage and loss of life. Well, some secretive little U.S. group, quote unquote, that had access to scalar technology themselves came in and fired back. And this caused a feedback loop which sort of bounced back all the way across to the Soviet Union and caused the Chernobyl disaster. And so that kind of taught them a lesson. Now, that was an unintended consequence of what they did. But the interesting thing is by doing that, they figure they've saved around 200,000 American lives. So, good for them. Then, in the same year, 1986, a friendly little nation prevented our nation's military infrastructure from being completely destroyed by an even more powerful scalar weapon attack from the Soviets. Now, even as recently as 1997, twice in 1 year, the U.S. came very close to being destroyed by scalar weapons, but the same little nation intervened on our behalf. However, what that means is that you have kind of a new version of that old mutual assured destruction thing, where essentially other nations have a scalar gun pointed at the head of the Russians, and they're saying, if you do something to America, we're going to do something worse to you. And that is partially, at least, what's keeping us from being totally destroyed by these things. But there are new threats on the horizon, and that's what I want to talk about now. And unfortunately, these aren't as easy to deal with. These newer threats come from rogue groups like the Yakuza, Aum Shinrikyo, and of course our most recent enemy is Islamic terrorist groups. Now, some of these might be unfamiliar to you, so I'm going to briefly discuss them. Aum Shinrikyo is a very weird Japanese doomsday cult. The words themselves mean sacred truth. And they believe it's their job to cause the end of the world. And to be blunt, they're basically whack jobs. And these people have done such horrible things as they unleashed sarin nerve gas in a Tokyo subway a decade ago on March 20th, 1995, caused 11 casualties and 5,000 injuries. They've done other things of a similar nature, and recently they changed their name to Aleph, which is kind of odd because that's the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet. Then there's the Yakuza. Some people compare these guys to like the mafia, but that's really doing a lot of justice more than needs to be to the mafia. These guys are far beyond the mafia. It's been called the mother of all crime syndicates, and it's a transnational organization that's more powerful in many countries. They're very much involved with the Japanese government at the deepest levels. They're also very much involved with the Japanese large industrial firms. I mean, let's face it, right now if you buy a car from Toyota or a camcorder from Sony, you're probably putting some money in the pockets of the Yakuza. And these guys are extremely nasty. Again, they make the mafia look like a Sunday school picnic. And these guys have joined forces with Aum Shinrikyo to lease scalar weapon sites from the KGB. Now here's what's happened. As many of you remember, when the Soviet Union fell, its economy fell as well. I mean,